I need to tell you something before I explain any of this. Donna Reyes worked the winter caretaker shift at Tanaq Bend Ranger Station. That's a documented fact. Federal seasonal employment, Interior, Alaska. She was assigned as the senior caretaker for the November through March rotation, and I was her partner, the new hire, brought in because the previous partner had left mid-season without filing an exit report. I have looked for her name in the federal employment records 3 times now. The first time, the database returned an error. The second time, the search completed, and the field where her name should have been was blank, not missing, not redacted, just blank. The way a form looks when it was never filled in. The third time, I didn't look. I already knew what I'd find. She existed. I need you to understand that. She made coffee with too much grounds and not enough patience. She had a laugh that she kept very short and very quiet because she'd learned not to let it run too long. She knew the names of every drainage in that valley from memory, and she could read a barometric pressure drop and the way the station's walls settled. She was real. Whatever the records say, or don't say, she was real, and she was the most capable person I've ever worked alongside. And I don't know if she made it out. I was a recording engineer before any of this. 12 years in studio work, mixing boards, acoustic panels, signal chains, the physics of sound in enclosed spaces. I understand how noise travels, and where it goes, and what it means. I left the industry after the studio went bankrupt, after a lot of things went wrong at once, and I took federal seasonal work because the posting said Isolated Monitoring Outpost, Interior, Alaska. And I needed, more than anything, a place where there was nothing left to misread. That's the terrible irony I carry now. The quietest place I've ever stood turned out to be the most dangerous thing I've ever encountered. And the silence there is not an absence. It's not the space between sounds. It is something that moves and listens and learns. I'm telling you this first so you understand the shape of what's coming. Someone's name is missing from the record. That name belonged to a person who taught me the rules that kept me alive. Whether I am the man who walked into Tanaq Bend in November, or something that learned to be him well enough to walk back out. That is the question I can't answer, and the one that wakes me at 2 a.m. when the apartment goes too quiet and my decibel app reads below 12. There are recordings on my phone that I should not still have. I know how that sounds. I know the rational explanation. I forgot to delete them. They auto-synced to a backup somewhere. The metadata is corrupted, and I'm misreading the timestamps. I have spent considerable effort constructing those explanations, because I am a technically trained person, and technically trained people do not readily accept that a file can change after it is made. But I have listened to 3 of them twice, separated by 2 months. And the second listening is not the same recording as the first. Not different in obvious ways. Not distorted or overlaid with something new. Different in small ways, the way a story changes when someone who wasn't there starts to tell it. A pause in the wrong place. A breath between words that I don't remember taking. My own voice saying my own name in a register I don't use when I'm alone. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what kind of narrator I am. My name is Marcus Holloway. Everyone calls me Mark. I was 34 years old when I arrived at Tanaq Bend, and I had just spent a year not talking to anyone if I could avoid it, because the last time I trusted what I heard, a man died for it. His name was Callum. He was the session bassist at the studio, a quiet man who made enormous sound. And one December night, during a late overdub session, I heard something through the cans, through the headphones that I read as signal feedback. A voice on the wrong frequency, a catch in the audio that sounded almost like someone saying a name. I logged it as equipment noise. I finished the session. I went home. Callum was found the next morning in the parking structure. He had been there since 11 p.m. He had called out, apparently, and the sound had come through the headphone feed, and I had written it down as feedback and turned the gain down to compensate. I have not mixed a record since. I cannot explain what I was thinking except that I was tired, and that the sound was ambiguous, and that I made a professional decision based on my professional training, and that my professional training was wrong in the way that costs people their lives. I took the Alaska posting because the listing said, no cell service, no neighbors, no drop-in visitors, no public foot traffic during winter closure. I wanted a place where the only sounds were mechanical and explainable. A generator, a propane heater, wind across a metal roof. I wanted a job where I could not fail to hear someone, because the only people there were me and one partner, and the rules said we had to check in on each other every 40 minutes. The rules. That's what I keep coming back to. The rules existed before I arrived. They were written down on a laminated card and pinned above the monitoring desk, and they accounted for exactly the kind of failure I'd committed in that studio. They were built by people who had already made my mistake. I'm going to tell you this in order, because the only way any of it makes sense is in the sequence it happened. Every decision I made felt reasonable when I made it. I need you to understand that. I need you to see how a rational person, a trained person, a careful and attentive person can still end up sitting frozen in a darkened ranger station at 4 a.m, unable to move, unable to speak, counting the breathing in a room that holds one too many people. The recordings are still changing. That's why I'm finally telling this now. Because whatever learned to sound like me out there may be getting better at it. And I would rather someone have the real version of my voice on record before the gap between them closes any further. The bush plane was a Cessna 185, and the pilot's name was Walt. And Walt did not waste words. We flew for 40 minutes over country that stopped looking like country after the first 10 just white, broken by black spruce and the occasional gray scar of a frozen drainage, and then more white. The kind of landscape that resets your sense of scale. You stop being able to tell if you're looking at a hill or a mountain, a creek or a river. Everything is the same, flat, enormous fact. I had a duffel, a hard case with personal recording equipment I'd brought out of habit, and 70 pounds of resupply gear that the Federal Logistics Coordinator had packed in cardboard boxes wrapped with orange tape. Walt had loaded all of it with the focused efficiency of a man who charged by the minute, and whose minutes were valuable because the light at this latitude in November was a resource you budgeted like fuel. He landed on a packed snow strip that I would not have recognized as a landing strip if there hadn't been 2 orange flags at one end. Then he helped me transfer everything onto a waiting snow machine, a Ski-Doo that had been left there for this purpose, keys in the ignition, a hand-drawn map laminated and tucked under the seat, and he pointed southeast and said, "The station was 11 miles along the drainage. Turn at the second beaver pond. Don't stop if the snow machine sounds wrong." I asked him if he wanted to wait while I got oriented. He looked at the sky. The sky was pale and flat, and the sun was already low, already doing its 4 p.m. disappearing act. And Walt said, "I don't stay past dusk at this strip. Station rule." I thought he meant his own rule, a pilot's sensible caution about winter light. I understand now that he meant something else. The ride to Tanaq Bend took 25 minutes, and I noticed the quiet about halfway through. Engine noise does not disappear on a snow machine. It is loud, mechanical, constant. But somewhere after the second drainage crossing, the sound began to behave differently. Not quieter, exactly, but narrower, as if the noise were being drawn in close instead of spreading out. The valley walls rose around me gradually, and the black spruce thickened, and the snow-covered ground came up on both sides and overhead where the branches met, and the engine sound stopped echoing the way engine sound should echo in open terrain. It was absorbed. That's the only word for it. The valley absorbed sound the way heavy curtains absorb light. Not reflecting it back, just taking it in, keeping it. A recording engineer notices these things. A recording engineer who has spent 12 years caring about acoustic properties notices when a space is behaving like a lined isolation booth instead of an open valley. I noticed. I filed it under interesting and kept writing. The station was exactly what the posting had described. A 2-room prefab structure on a timber platform, buried to its windowsills in packed snow, with a stovepipe and a satellite antenna, and a hand-painted sign on the door frame that read, "Tanaq Bend, authorized personnel only." Warm light from the window. A generator housing visible on the east side, humming steadily. It looked like safety. It looked like a thermos, small, sealed, holding heat against the cold. And beneath the floor, just barely audible when Walt's snow machine engine had faded to nothing, and the valley had closed over it like water over a stone. I heard something else, a low, steady tone. Not the generator, lower than the generator. A vibration more than a sound, the kind that you feel in your back teeth, rather than hear with your ears. The station was humming. Something under it was humming. And the valley was very, very quiet around it. The way a room goes quiet when something in it is paying close attention. She was already at the desk when I pushed through the door, and she was writing in the physical logbook with a mechanical pencil. And she did not look up immediately. That was the first thing I noticed about Dana Reyes. She finished what she was doing before she acknowledged you. Not rudeness, precision. She was a woman who understood that incomplete log entries were how things got missed. "Holloway," she said, still writing. "Close the outer door first, then the inner. In that order." I did. She capped the pencil. She stood. She was maybe 40, Lean in the specific way that people get lean when they spend winters in serious, cold, not athletic lean, survival lean. The kind of lean where your body has made a decision about what it absolutely needs and discarded everything else. She had dark eyes that moved around a room the way a sound engineer's eyes move around a board, checking levels, checking positions, registering anything that has shifted since the last check. She shook my hand, and her grip was dry and direct, and she said, "Dana Reyes, I've been here since October. You're my third partner." I didn't ask what happened to the first two. The way she said third made it clear that the number was informational, not an invitation. She showed me the station in 15 minutes flat. Main room, the monitoring desk with the radio equipment, the decibel meter mounted on the wall, a Brule and Hyair unit, commercial grade, which I recognized and which surprised me to find this far from a city. The logbook shelf, the 2-burner propane stove, the folding table, the back room, 2 narrow bunks, a gear locker, a propane heater on a safety mount, a hatch in the main room floor, padlocked, with a laminated placard zip-tied to the hasp that read, "Do not open without authorization. /seismic array, maintenance only." The hum I had heard outside was louder near the hatch. Not loud, present. Reyes showed me the radio check windows, 2-hour intervals on a logged frequency, coordinated with a relay station 60 miles east. She showed me the generator fuel log, the snow load threshold chart, the propane pressure gauge. She walked me through the weather threshold for no travel, visibility under a quarter mile, wind over 30 knots, or a temperature wind chill below -40. Below that threshold, you stayed put, regardless of any other consideration. She was professional. She was thorough. She was watching the decibel meter on the wall every 90 seconds with a regularity that looked like breathing. I noticed it because I watch things the way she did. I noticed it, and I waited until the end of the orientation to ask. "The decibel meter," I said. "What's the threshold you're watching for?" She stopped. She looked at me for a moment, not sizing me up, I thought, but deciding something. "Come here," she said, and walked to the laminated card pinned above the desk. 7 numbered lines. She read them without inflection, the way you read a fire evacuation procedure. The way you read something you have read enough times that the words have stopped being words and started being physics. I liked her immediately. I trusted her competence the way I had only ever trusted the competence of people who are honest about what frightens them. She was frightened of something here. I could see that in the way she stood, with her back to the wall rather than the window. In the way her glance toward the meter was not nervous, but alert. The way a pilot glances at an altimeter, making sure, not afraid, just never not checking. I regret liking her. I regret it more specifically than I regret almost anything else, which is saying something, because I have a fairly extensive list. I regret it because what the thing out there would eventually use against me was not my fear. It was my trust, my relief at finding someone competent in an isolated place. It used Dana Reyes because I would do anything to protect her. The card was standard government lamination, the kind they use for trail markers and fire safety placards, thick plastic, slightly yellowed at the edges. The text printed in a clean, sans serif font that looked like it had been typed on a word processor and printed on a laser printer sometime in the mid-90s. Official. Unremarkable. The kind of document that exists in 100 federal outposts and says things like, ensure generator fuel levels are logged daily, and radio check failure must be reported to district within 2 hours. Except it didn't say any of those things. It said this: Rule 1. On any night, the outdoor decibel meter reads below 12. You are in a silence. Log the time. Do not speak above a whisper until it reads above 12 again. Rule 2. During a silence, keep both radios off. A live radio produces a carrier hiss that can follow indoors. Rule 3. You work the night shift in pairs. Every 40 minutes, one of you says the other's name at a whisper and waits for the correct answer. If the answer is wrong or too fast, say nothing else and do not turn around. Rule 4. Never let a silence hear, where you cry, laugh, or call for help. Grief is the loudest thing in the valley. Rule 5. If you hear your own voice from outside, do not answer it. If you hear it from inside, wake your partner. Rule 6. The seismic array in the cellar must be left running. Its low tone masks you. If the cellar tone stops, both of you go silent and still until dawn. No exceptions, no matter who is hurt. Rule 7. At the end of a silence, before you speak normally, count the breathing in the room. If you count more people than are supposed to be there, keep counting until the number is right. Never stop early. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, more slowly, the way you read something that your brain is trying to process as fiction, even though the context insists it's operational procedure. These are the rules, Reyes said. She wasn't asking. These are the rules, I said. Who wrote them? They've been revised by every caretaker team since 1987. The original 7 were written by the first winter pair. The language has been adjusted, but the substance hasn't changed. The substance, I said, which is that there is something out there that hunts by sound. The substance, she said, is that the rules work. I pushed back. I did it respectfully, because she was clearly competent, and I was clearly the new hire. But I pushed back the way any rational person would push back. I said that a decibel reading below 12 was phenomenologically close to a soundproof chamber, that ordinary ambient environment in an open rural setting ran between 30 and 50 decibels, and that dropping below 12 without mechanical assistance was, in my professional opinion, not something the outdoor environment did on its own. She said, it does here. I said that keeping the radios off during any kind of emergency situation was a significant safety liability. She said, more significant than the alternative. I said that Rule 3 described a paranoia management exercise, not a security protocol, and that the psychological effect of mandatory name-checking on an isolated 2-person team was likely to produce exactly the anxiety it claimed to prevent. Reyes was quiet for a moment. She turned and looked at me with the same expression she'd used when she decided whether to tell me about the meter, not deciding whether to be patient with me, I understood later, but deciding how much truth was useful at this stage of my understanding. The last person who argued, she said, isn't here. I did not ask who the last person was. The way she said it did not invite that question. It closed the topic the way a correctly latched door closes, not slammed, just firmly, finally shut. I read the card a fourth time. Then I looked at the meter on the wall. 31 decibels. The valley at rest, the generator running, the normal noise of a winter evening. I decided, privately, that I would give the rules exactly as much credibility as the evidence warranted. Not more. The evidence, as it turned out, was comprehensive. I came back to Rule 4 that evening, while Reyes was checking the propane pressure on the back room heater. I stood at the laminated card and read it again. Never let a silence hear you cry, laugh, or call for help. Grief is the loudest thing in the valley. It was specifically worded in a way that the other rules weren't. Rules 1 through 3 were operational. They described a procedure and a consequence. Rules 5 through 7 described specific threat scenarios and response protocols. Rule 4 was something different. Rule 4 was almost personal. The phrasing "grief is the loudest thing in the valley" didn't read like federal safety language. It read like something someone had learned. When Reyes came back, I asked her about it. She went to the stove and poured herself coffee from the percolator. She didn't look at me immediately. "Sound travels differently in a valley like this," she said finally. "You know that. You heard it on the way in. I'd guess the way the engine noise pulled in, rather than spreading." "I noticed," I said. "Emotional sound carries farther here than any other kind. Physical volume isn't the mechanism." She paused. She was choosing her words with a care that was different from her usual precision, slower, like she was walking ground she knew to be soft. Grief resonates differently. So does laughter. So does the specific sound of a human voice at the upper register of distress. They carry farther than a shout at the same decibel level. We don't fully understand the mechanism. We know the effect. And the effect is that it hears you. The effect, she said, is that it comes. I watched her drink her coffee. She was standing at the far side of the table, facing the window, and I could see the reflection of the decibel meter in the dark glass. 31. Steady. "What did you lose?" I asked. I said it quietly, because the question wasn't unkind. It was recognition. One person identifying the shape of a wound in another person because they carry the same shape themselves. She didn't answer that directly. She said, "Grief carries farther than any shout-out here. That's all the explanation the rule requires." I let it go, but I held on to the shape of what I'd heard in her voice when she said it, the controlled steadiness of someone who has practiced keeping a particular sound from forming. I understood that kind of practice. I had been practicing it for a year. My wound was this. I heard Callum, and I called it feedback, and I turned the gain down. His cry, and it was a cry, I know that now. I have always known it. Since the morning they found him, his cry came through my headphones, and I silenced it. Professionally, technically, correctly, by every standard of studio practice. And he died in a parking structure while I drove home and ate a late dinner and went to sleep. Rule 4 was, in its structure, the exact punishment for my exact failure. It told me that the sound I had been trained to suppress, the sound of human distress, was the most dangerous thing I could produce. Standing there in the warm light of the main room, with the decibel meter at 31, and the propane heater ticking in the back room, and the valley pressing soft and enormous against the station's walls, I made a private decision. I would test the meter myself. I would calibrate my own reading of the rules against evidence, and I would not let fear I could not measure dictate my behavior in a situation I was still evaluating. That decision, in retrospect, was the last purely rational one I made at Tanaq Bend. That night, around 11:15, the meter began to fall. Our shift rotation was simple in structure and demanding in practice. One person monitored from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. The other slept, or tried to, in the back room. Then they swapped. At 4 a.m., both were awake for the dawn check generator fuel, propane gauge, snow load assessment on the roof, radio check with the Eastern Relay Station at 4:30. The physical logbook got a full entry at each checkpoint. Time, temperature, barometric pressure, the decibel reading, any wildlife sign from the camera trap, any equipment anomaly. Nothing got skipped. The logbook was the official record, and the logbook was also, I would eventually understand, the station's institutional memory of what had happened here before. The first few nights were ordinary, in the way that early days, at any job, are ordinary dense with learning, slightly exhausting, but not unpleasant. Reyes was a good teacher. She didn't explain more than was necessary, and she didn't hover. But she was watchful in a way that felt like backup rather than oversight. When I missed a step in the generator log, she corrected it without commentary. When I struggled with the radio's frequency protocol, she walked me through it once and then let me fumble until I had it. The valley was beautiful in daylight. The hour and a half of it we got. White and severe and enormous. The kind of landscape that makes you feel appropriately small. The 3 drainages that came together at the valley floor were frozen over, and in the low-angle winter sun, they reflected light the color of old pewter. Black spruce stood in dense lines along the upper slopes, and sometimes, in the far distance, you could see the movement of something caribou, maybe, or moose crossing the open snow above the tree line. At night, it was different. At night, the valley stopped being beautiful and started being present, the way a large animal in a room is present, even when it isn't moving. You were aware of it. You were aware of the specific quality of the quiet, the way the darkness at the windows was not empty, but full of whatever it contained. I monitored the first 2 solo shifts without incident. The meter hovered between 28 and 34, normal ambient for a still, cold night with a running generator and no wind. The radio check at 2 a.m. came back clean. The relay operator, a man named Greer, who had the tired voice of someone working an overnight desk job in a warm building, called our number. And I called his back, and that was the entire transaction. Simple, functional, the kind of routine that starts to feel, after a few repetitions, like the thing that keeps the world in order. Reyes had a dry humor that emerged in small doses after the first day. She described the snow load assessment protocol. You had to physically climb up and probe the roof accumulation with a marked pole as the one part of this job where it's clear nobody thought about it very hard. She said the wildlife incident report form had a category for unusual animal behavior that she had filled in with everything, always, and nobody had ever commented. She talked about the valley with a technical knowledge that suggested she had studied it, or that it had studied her, and probably both. I liked those hours. The propane heat, the small sounds of the station, the logbook filling with neat entries. 2 people doing a job in a remote place with competence and a little humor. It was what I had come for. I watched the meter hover at 31 and thought, this is manageable. This is exactly what I needed. The wind died completely just before midnight on the 4th night. I know what the silence of a recording studio feels like. I've sat in rooms lined with acoustic foam where the ambient noise was below 20 decibels, where you could hear your own circulation, where the silence had weight and texture and a slight pressure at the eardrums. I know how silence behaves when it is engineered. I know the difference between the quiet of an isolated natural environment and the quiet of a deliberately soundproofed space. What happened to the meter that 4th night was neither of those things. It started at 28. The wind had dropped, which accounted for some of it wind across the roof, added 3 to 5 decibels on active nights. But the drop didn't stop at 25, where physics said it should level off. The generator was running. The propane heater was ticking. The refrigerator unit hummed. Those 3 sources alone should have held the ambient at 22, 23, somewhere in that range. The meter read 21, then 18, then 15. Reyes was writing in the logbook when the number hit 16. She stopped writing. She put the mechanical pencil down very carefully on the desk, parallel to the edge, the way you set something down when you don't want to make noise. I watched her. She was watching the meter. 14, 13. The heater in the back room ticked once and then went silent. Not off the pilot light stayed lit. I checked, but the sound of it stopped. The refrigerator unit stopped humming. I know how to describe it now. The sounds were still occurring, but they were being pulled under something, pressed down, absorbed by the same mechanism I had noticed on the snow machine ride-in. The valley was inhaling. 12. The meter chirped once a small electronic tone. The threshold alarm I hadn't known was configured, and the number held for 3 seconds, and then dropped to 11. Reyes reached over, without hurry, and opened the logbook to the current date. She wrote the time, 11:47 p.m., in the column labeled Silence on Set. Her handwriting was even and clear. She capped the pen. She turned to me, and she lowered her voice to something that was barely breath-given shape. "We're in 1, she mouthed, more than said. I nodded. She pointed at the 2 radios on the desk. Then she pointed at her own ear, then at the wall of the station, and made a slow, tracing gesture with one finger, something following a signal from outside, moving toward its source. I nodded again. Rule 2. I understood the instruction. I didn't yet understand what had earned the rule its place on the card. She mouthed one word: begin. The station had been warm and lit and ordinary 4 minutes ago. The routine had been comfortable, and the meter had been at 28. And the valley had been a beautiful, cold fact outside the windows. Now the windows were dark in a way that was different from the darkness of an hour ago. And the meter read 11. And the sounds of the station's equipment had gone somewhere below the threshold of my hearing. in the valley was not a fact anymore. It was listening. You cannot understand what a genuine acoustic environment below 12 decibels feels like until you have been inside one that you did not create and cannot leave. In a studio, the silence is a tool. You built it. You know exactly what absorbed the sound and where the energy went. You are in control of the quiet, and the quiet is in service to your purpose. And if something goes wrong, you walk out the door. In Tanaq Bend, below 12, the silence was the environment. All of it. It pressed against the windows, and it sat on the roof, and it filled the valley for as far as any sound we made could possibly travel. And the station sat inside it, the way a held breath sits inside a chest, small, contained, trying very hard not to draw attention to itself. I felt it in the eardrums first, a slight pressure differential, like the beginning of altitude change. Then in the jaw, a tightness, the body's automatic response to an environment that is giving it no audio information to process. Then, slowly, I became aware of sounds I was making that I had never consciously registered. The soft adhesion release of my lips when I breathed through my mouth. The faint percussion of my heartbeat at the temporal artery. The granular whisper of my jacket sleeve against the desk edge when I shifted my arm. Every sound I made was suddenly enormous to me. Every sound I made felt like a signal. Reyes moved through the room with a control that was not stillness, but precision. She did only what needed to be done. She did it with the minimum motion, and every movement was deliberate and soft. She killed the overhead fluorescent and switched to a small LED task lamp that produced less mechanical hum. She put foam inserts in the weather seal gap at the base of the outer door, which I hadn't noticed before, and which she clearly had done many times. She made the room smaller, quieter, more contained. I sat at the monitoring desk and tried to do the same with my breathing. Slower, shallower, less. Outside, roughly 20 minutes into the silence, something tapped the south wall. One tap, a pause, one tap, then 3 taps, slightly faster, testing a rhythm. It wasn't an animal sound. I know animal sounds in winter, the crack of a branch under accumulated snow, the scrape of a large ungulate against a tree trunk, the occasional impact of a bird or small mammal against the surface. This was none of those. This was measured. It had the quality of an experiment rather than an accident. Tap, observe, tap again, observe. Reyes was at the desk across from me, and she did not move when it started. Her eyes came up to meet mine, and she held my gaze and shook her head, once, minimally. Don't respond. Don't even lean toward the sound. I stayed still. The tapping moved along the south wall from the far corner toward the window. Slow, methodical, a finger-width gap at a time, feeling its way. And then it stopped. The pause lasted long enough that I began to exhale. I began to think, gone. Whatever it was has moved on, has found nothing here, has passed. I reached for the radio. I don't know why I did it. That's not quite true. I know exactly why. I am a person who does not trust evidence he cannot calibrate. And the evidence I was being asked to trust was a number on a meter and a set of rules on a laminated card, and the controlled fear in one partner's eyes. My professional instinct, the instinct honed over 12 years of believing in measurable things, said, "Test it. 1 second, 1 data point. Confirm the rule or disconfirm it, and stop operating on faith." My thumb found the power switch on the secondary radio and pressed it for 1 second. Maybe less. A half-second of live circuit. The barest possible carrier hiss the low, warm electronic breath that a radio produces when it's powered and waiting, not transmitting, just existing on the frequency. Reyes's head came up. Her eyes went to the wall. I heard the footsteps in the snow outside at the same moment she did. Not approaching from a distance. Already at the wall, already moving, circling towards the south corner, towards the corner closest to the desk, closest to where the radio signal had originated. Not searching. Homing. The footsteps were heavy enough to compress the snowpack, which told me size, and they were evenly spaced at a stride interval that was longer than a human stride, but not dramatically so, which told me pattern, and they moved with a purposeful directness that told me everything else. It had heard the carrier hiss. From outside the station, at 11 decibels of ambient, it had heard a half-second pulse of electronic background, and it had triangulated the source, and it was walking toward it. Reyes was across the desk, and her hand was on the radio before the footsteps had taken 3 strides. She hit the power switch, killed it completely, then pressed both palms flat on the desk and went absolutely motionless. I did the same, every muscle locked. The footsteps slowed as they reached the south corner. I could hear, or I believed I could hear, believed I felt the shift in the air pressure at the window as something stood close to the glass on the other side. We did not move. After what the clock later told me was 4 minutes and 20 seconds, the footsteps resumed, moving back the way they had come, retreating, unhurrying, the way something retreats when it is not afraid, but is simply determined that the sound source is no longer active. We sat in the stillness for another hour and 40 minutes, until the meter climbed back through 12, and the station's ambient sounds reasserted themselves one by one, surfacing from under the silence like objects floating up through dark water. When the threshold chirped and the meter read 13, Reyes exhaled. She picked up the logbook pen. "You tested it," she said. Not an accusation, a statement of fact, the kind that costs effort to deliver without anger. "Yes," I said. She wrote the silence end time in the log. She wrote a note in the margin that I recognized later as shorthand. Radio contact, south approach, withdrew. Then she said, "The worst rule hasn't happened yet." My skepticism was gone. I want to be precise about that. It did not erode gradually over subsequent nights. It ended in the moment the footsteps moved towards the corner where the radio signal had come from, with the particular directness of something that was not guessing. That specificity, the straight line from carrier hiss to source, was more convincing than any explanation Reyes could have given me. It was data. I was a data person. The data had arrived. She explained it properly in the morning, when the sun was doing its low-angle crawl across the valley floor, and the meter was at 38, and we could speak in normal voices without consequence. She sat across from me at the folding table, with her hands around a coffee mug, and she talked about it the way you talk about a phenomenon you've had to make peace with. Not comfortably, but without the raw edges of new knowledge. It isn't about volume, she said. That's the first thing people get wrong. A scream and a sob at the same physical decibel level produce completely different effects here. The scream doesn't draw it. The sob does. She looked at the mug. The distress signal, the specific frequency pattern of a human voice under extreme emotional stress, crying, the breaking sound of a laugh that someone is trying to suppress, the particular register of a voice calling for help, not shouting help, but the sound of someone who believes they need it and knows no one is coming. Why those specifically? I asked. Best we can reconstruct, she said. Those sounds carry resonance, information, that other sounds don't. Emotional audio has harmonic complexity that a flat shout doesn't. It's information dense. It propagates differently in valleys with this kind of drainage geometry. She paused. And at whatever it is learned, that those sounds mean there is something worth approaching, something vulnerable, something it can use. I thought about 12 years of studio work, about the way a singer's voice changes when a performance becomes something more than performance, when they stop thinking about the technical execution, and the emotion stops being a choice and starts being a fact. I knew exactly what she was describing acoustically. I had spent a career trying to capture that quality on tape, that specific frequency signature of genuine human feeling, because it was the thing that made a recording feel real. The thing in the valley had learned the same thing. It had learned that sound, and it came toward it. I told her about Callum then. Not all of it. I don't think I was capable of all of it at once, but the structure of it. The cry on the headphone feed, the professional decision, the parking structure. She listened without expression, which was the appropriate response, and also the compassionate one, not performing sympathy, just holding the space. That's why Rule 4 is the hardest one for you, she said. It's exactly my wound, I said. The sound I failed to hear correctly is the sound the rule says will kill us if I make it. She was quiet for a moment. The next silence will try to make you break it, she said. It reads what you carry. It's been reading you since you arrived. It will use whatever is loudest in you. I started to ask how it could know that. What I meant, what I couldn't quite form into a question was, how does a thing that hunts by sound know what a person grieves? She answered the question I hadn't asked. It doesn't know. It broadcasts until something breaks. She looked at the window. It has a very long patience. The second silence came 3 nights later, at 1:23 a.m., and dropped faster than the first, from 26 to 9, in under 8 minutes. Reyes logged it with the same calm notation, and we fell into whisper protocol immediately. Radios dark, lamp dimmed. All the careful preparation of people who had now done this once before and knew what the preparation was for. For an hour, nothing happened outside. The meter held at 9. The valley pressed in around the station's walls, and the station's sounds were reduced to the sub-audible hum of the seismic array beneath the floor. And we monitored, and we did not speak, and we waited. Then I heard my name. It came from outside, from the direction of the north drainage, and it was voiced in a register that I recognized before I consciously processed it, the particular acoustic quality of a voice I had not heard in over a year. The phrasing was simple, just my name, the way you call to someone you need. And then, beneath the name, a question. Why didn't you come? 3 words. The words I had been asking myself for 14 months, delivered in the voice of the person I had not come for. Callum had been a baritone. His speaking voice sat low and slightly hoarse, the voice of someone who sang loud and often. I had recorded that voice 100 times. I knew its acoustic fingerprint the way I knew my own name in my own handwriting. It was his voice. It was precisely, exactly, completely his voice. I felt the grief move up through me, the way seismic movement travels through ground from the base, irresistibly. And the only question was whether it would crack something structural on the way up. My chest went tight. My vision blurred along the edges. I heard myself make a sound that was the beginning of something I could not afford to let become sound. Reyes's hand closed over my mouth. Not harsh, exact. She was beside me in the dark, her palm pressed against my lips with a firmness that was also an anchor. Her other hand braced at the back of my neck, and she held me with the specific steadiness of someone who has done this before, who has held a person together in the dark while something outside their window called to them in a voice they loved. I don't know how long we stayed like that. I know I was shaking. I know the voice outside said the words twice more and then stopped. Not abruptly, but trailing, the way sound trails when its source moves away. When the meter climbed back through 12 at 3:11 a.m., Reyes took her hand away slowly, making sure I was stable before she let go. "It found yours fast," she said. Her voice was careful and even. "That means it's been listening since day one." I was looking at the north window, at the dark where the voice had come from. "It couldn't have known about Callum," I said. "I never said his name out loud here." Reyes set her coffee down. "It doesn't know the content," she said. "It knows the shape, the frequency signature of what you carry. It found the frequency, and then it built toward it." She paused. "It's been reading us both since we arrived, which means it knows mine too." She said it flatly, and I understood that what she was telling me was not just information about the entity. She was telling me that she had already survived her own version of this moment, her own voice in the dark, calling the name of someone she could not answer for. What she carried, I realized, was the weight of Pike. She told me about it 2 days later, in the afternoon light, while we were doing the snow load check on the roof. We were both up there with the probe poles, working the north and south sections. And there is something about physical work in cold air and daylight that allows a kind of honesty that enclosed spaces at night don't quite permit. Pike's name was Jonas. He had come in the previous November as her partner, a former forestry tech from Oregon, competent and steady and optimistic in a way that Reyes described without sentiment. He thought the rules were there to be understood. He wanted to know the mechanism before he trusted the procedure. "That sounds familiar?" I said. "Most people start that way," she said. "The ones who last stop needing the mechanism." Pike had lasted 6 weeks. He had lasted well-disciplined, careful, a fast learner. He had not broken any of the rules, not visibly, not in the ways that had immediate consequences. But something had begun to shift in the second month. Small things. He answered Reyes's name checks slightly faster than was natural, which she noted but did not act on because his answers were always correct. He began to sleep in longer intervals than the rotation allowed. He started standing at the window during silences rather than stepping back from it. "I noticed," she said. "I didn't move on it fast enough." She was probing the snow at the north edge of the roof, not looking at me, her breath making a steady plume in the still air. One dawn, after a silence, she said, I did the breath count. Rule 7. I counted 3. She stopped probing. I kept counting, she said, the way you're supposed to. I kept counting, and by the time the number came right, Pike was gone from the bunk. She picked up the probe again. I found him outside, disoriented. He didn't remember getting up. He said he'd heard his own voice from inside the station. Rule 5, second clause, wake your partner. He hadn't woken me. What happened to him? I asked. He wrote his last log entry on the following day, she said. I found it in the morning. He'd been awake all night writing it. She paused. It said, I answered wrong on purpose so she wouldn't have to. She said it without grief in her voice. She'd had a year to carry it without the grief sound, which was how she had survived it. Not by not feeling it, by learning where to put it so it couldn't be heard. Make me a promise, she said. She looked at me now, direct. If I ever answer the name, check wrong. If the answer is too fast, or flat, or wrong in any way, follow Rule 3 exactly. Don't turn around. Don't speak. Don't try to help me. Reyes, promise me, she said, the same tone she used for the logbook entry. Not negotiable. A protocol item. I promise, I said. She nodded once and went back to probing the snow. Around us, the valley was white and bright and completely still. She took me down to the cellar that evening. The hatch opened with the key from a hook above the desk, a heavy padlock that left cold oil on my fingers, and below it, a short ladder descending into a space that was wider than the main room above it. The station's footprint was smaller than the array's original installation, which had been built first. The cellar smelled of cold concrete and machine oil, and something older beneath those, something mineral and permanent, the smell of deep ground. The seismic array was a Cold War installation, decommissioned in the late 80s, and repurposed, that was the official terminology, repurposed as part of the station's operational infrastructure. What it actually was, physically, was a series of transducer banks mounted along the concrete walls, connected by thick cable bundles to a central control rack that ran on its own power feed, independent of the station generator. The equipment was old and institutional, and maintained in the specific way that essential equipment gets maintained. Not upgraded, not modernized, just kept running. Every part that fails replaced with an equivalent part, because changing the specifications of the output would change the output, and the output was the point. I recognized what it was doing within about 30 seconds of standing next to it. It's emitting a masking tone, I said. Reyes said yes. Not just masking, I said. I crouched next to the transducer bank and put my hand near the housing. I could feel the vibration without quite hearing it, below 80 hertz. well into the sub-bass range, which the human ear perceives as pressure rather than pitch. It's doing something to the voice print frequencies. It's actively canceling something. Our specific vocal range, she said, the frequencies that make a human voice identifiable. The array generates an inverse signal in those frequency bands, continuously. Whatever is outside hears the masking tone instead of us. I straightened up and looked at the rack. 12 years of audio work, and I had never seen anything built to do this in a real-world application. Active cancellation of voice print frequencies across an open, outdoor acoustic environment was a problem that I had understood to be practically unsolvable. Too many variables, too much interference. The physics didn't cooperate. "This is working," I said. "How is this working?" "We don't know," Reyes said. "Not the station's engineers don't know. Not the federal maintenance team doesn't know. We don't know." She had said it the way a person says something they have accepted as a boundary, not with frustration, but with the settled patience of someone who has stopped looking for the door in a wall that doesn't have one. "The station exists to keep this running," she said. "That's the actual reason for the caretaker rotation. Every other function of this post, the wildlife monitoring, the weather relay, the seismic data logging, all of it is secondary to keeping this machine operational through the winter. If it stops, we lose the mask." "And if we lose the mask," I said. "Rule 6, she said. "Go silent and still until dawn. No exceptions, no matter who is hurt." I stood in the cellar for another minute, listening to the thing that wasn't quite a sound and wasn't quite a silence, and was keeping us hidden from something that hunted by hearing. The old concrete walls, the Cold War transducers, the cable bundles like gray roots going into the floor. Before we went back up, Reyes pointed to the logbook shelf mounted on the far cellar wall. Standard green government binders, a dozen of them, labeled by year, and one red one at the end of the row, with no label at all. "Don't read that one," she said. She said it like Rule 8, if there had been a Rule 8. She went back up the ladder. I followed. I thought about the red logbook for 3 days before I opened it. Reyes slept between 2 and 6 a.m. on the third day after the cellar visit, and I went down through the hatch with a headlamp and the cold on the back of my neck. The binder was exactly what it looked like. From a distance, a standard government 3-ring binder. Red cover. No label. Inside it, instead of one team's log, was a compiled record spanning from 1987 to the present. Different handwriting, different pencils and pens, different quality of paper, where pages had been added or replaced. Each section was headed by a date range and 2 names, the caretaker pair for that winter rotation. I skimmed. I was looking for a pattern, because patterns are what a sound engineer looks for the signal beneath the noise. It was there. Every few sections, in the margin of the final log entry before a winter's end, there was a notation in a different hand. A reviewer's edition, after the fact, summarizing the season's outcome. Most were unremarkable. Season completed. No incident. Pair departed. Date. Some had a notation that appeared in variant forms across multiple winters. Count off by 1 corrected. Followed by a new entry continuing in the same hand. Both names persisting forward. but several times I counted 6 times across 38 years. The notation read, "Count off by 1 not corrected." And after those entries, one of the 2 names in that section's header simply never appeared again. Not a departing note, not a completion summary, just present, then absent, the way a sound drops from a recording. You notice it only because there was always something there before. I found Pike's section near the back. Jonas Pike, Dana Reyes, winter rotation beginning November. His entries were clear and detailed in the first week's better than average observation quality, actually, with good technical notation of the seismic array output and careful weather data. The shift started around week 7. His entries became shorter, then sparse. Then there was a gap of 2 days with only Reyes's handwriting, and then one final entry in Pike's hand. It was short. He'd written it, based on the timestamp, at 3:47 a.m., alone on his monitoring shift. The handwriting was still precise. Whatever had been happening to him, he had held on to the precision. She followed Rule 3. She didn't turn around. That was a right call, and I know it. I've been answering too fast, and I know she knows. I think it has most of me. I can feel where it's filled in the parts I don't have anymore. If I run the check now, I'll answer wrong. I'll answer what it wants me to answer. I answered wrong on purpose, so she wouldn't have to. Keep the hum running. It matters more than we do. I sat on the cold concrete in the cellar, with the binder open in my lap, and the headlamp beam making a small, personal circle of light in the dark. Above me, the seismic array hummed its impossible sub-bass masking tone. Above that, Reyes slept. I understood, reading Pike's last entry, that answered wrong on purpose did not mean he had made a mistake. It meant he had made a choice. The entity copies by hearing a voice enough times, through the buddy checks, through the station's enclosed acoustic space, through the intimate proximity of a 2-person winter shift. At some point, enough of Jonas Pike had been recorded that the entity could run the name check with his voice, and he knew it. And rather than force Reyes to follow Rule 3 in response to his real answer, which would have meant sitting with her back to the thing that looked like him, saying nothing, doing nothing, he had answered with the wrong answer first. He had made himself the problem before the problem made him into something else. I climbed back up through the hatch and latched it, and sat at the monitoring desk and looked at the decibel meter. 32. Normal. Safe. I thought about how long it took, how many name checks, how gradually. That night, during a silence, I ran the 40-minute name check. It was 2:17 a.m. Reyes was supposed to be asleep in the back room. I had been alone at the monitoring desk for 90 minutes, which meant 2 name check cycles had already passed, both clear, both correct. Both in Reyes's voice from the back room bunk, slightly drowsy, but appropriately paced, with the small hesitation of someone who has been lightly sleeping and is surfacing to respond. At 2:17, the meter was at 10. We had been in silence for 40 minutes. I had already killed the radios. The valve tone from the seismic array below provided the only consistent sound in the room. I leaned toward the doorway to the back room, and I whispered, "Reyes." The answer came back in half a second. No drowsy surface time. No small pause. And the voice was correct. Dana Reyes's voice. The precise timbre and register and quality of it. But it came too fast, and it sat flat in the air. Flat the way a reproduced sound sits flat when it has been separated from the resonating body that originally made it. I said nothing. I did not turn around. Rule 3. If the answer is wrong or too fast, say nothing else and do not turn around. I did not turn around. I sat at the desk and I faced the monitoring equipment, and I became very specifically aware of the doorway to the back room, which was directly behind my left shoulder, and of the fact that I could not look at it. I could not determine whether the real Reyes was asleep in her bunk, which meant the answer had come from something that had positioned itself near the doorway in the dark, or whether the real Reyes had gotten up without my hearing it and was standing in the doorway now, disoriented, in the early stage of whatever had happened to Pike in his 7th week, or whether both of those things were somehow, terribly, simultaneously true. The meter read 9. The silence held. The station's walls were dark and close, and the valley was enormous and silent around them. I did not move from the chair. I did not speak. I sat with my back to the doorway for 3 hours and 40 minutes, until the meter climbed through 12, and the station's ambient sounds came back, and I waited until the number held above 15 before I turned around. The doorway was empty. The back room bunk held Reyes, asleep, her breathing slow and regular. She woke when I stood in the doorway, and she looked at me with the clear eyes of someone who has actually been sleeping. And she said, "Check, do?" "No," I said. "Sleep." She did. I went back to the desk and wrote in the logbook, 2:17 a.m., whisper check, answer. Incorrect response time. Rule 3 observed, dawn, both partners present. I looked at what I'd written. Both partners present. Which meant the thing that answered was also present somewhere and had been in the station with us in the dark. Which meant the buddy check designed to detect a copy had also fed the copy another clear sample of Reyes's voice. At dawn, both Reyeses were gone from the bunk. I found her at the east side of the station at first light, standing in the snow without her outer coat, looking at the tree line. She was not distressed. She was alert in the specific way that people are alert when they have been somewhere else in their minds and have only just arrived back in their bodies. She did not remember getting up. That was what she said when I brought her coat, and she came back inside, and I poured coffee, and we sat at the folding table in the early gray light. She had no memory of leaving the bunk. The last thing she remembered was falling back to sleep after the check I'd asked her about. The next thing she remembered was the cold on her face and the snow under her boots and me appearing at the corner of the station. Her boot prints in the snow went from the station door to the spot where she'd been standing. Directly. No wandering, no hesitation, like someone who knew where they were going. I ran a check at 2:17, I said. The answer was wrong. She looked at her coffee. How wrong? Fast? Flat? I paused. It sounded like you. She was quiet for a moment. How many checks has it heard? I counted back. 6 name check cycles since I'd arrived, both voices, both directions. 12 samples of Reyes's name in my voice. 12 samples of her response, plus the continuous proximity of a two-person station over 3 weeks, our voices in normal conversation, in whispered communication, during silences, in the logbook reading and orientation, and the dry humor at the end of long shifts. "Enough," I said. She nodded. The doubling started small, the way all significant things start. I came in from the snow load check to find my coffee mug filled, but I had filled it myself 20 minutes earlier and had drunk half of it, and the mug was now full again and hot. I went to the gear locker for my spare headlamp batteries and found the tray holding 2 sets where I had left one. The differences were small enough that each one had an innocent explanation. I had refilled the coffee and forgotten. I had miscounted the batteries, and the explanations were almost certainly wrong. And then, on the 4th night after the wrong answer, I heard my own name. Not Reyes's voice, my voice, my exact voice, from slightly farther away than the south wall, pitched with a careful neutrality of something that had learned my range, but not yet my depth. Marcus, just the name, calm, informational, the sound of myself calling to myself from the tree line. Reyes was at my shoulder immediately. She had heard it too. "It's been cataloging you," she said. "Since when? Since you arrived?" She was watching the south window. "The checks work both directions. When you say my name, it learns you. I've been hearing small versions of this for a week. Your voice at the drainage edge. Your voice from the roof." She looked at me. "I didn't tell you, because telling you would have been worse than not knowing." I understood why. I also understood that the situation had shifted. The entity had enough of both of us now. 2 voices. 2 names. The complete acoustic vocabulary of our 2-person station. "Which rule is next?" I asked, though I already knew. She looked at the south window again. "Rule 5, she said. It happened on the following night, at 12:40 a.m., meter at 8, well inside a silence that had been running for 2 hours. My voice came from the tree line. Not my name, my voice, constructing sentences with the specific cadence and word choice and rhythm that I use when I'm explaining something that matters to me. The entity had learned enough to do more than call. It was speaking in full-formed thoughts, and the thoughts were calibrated for me, aimed at the specific frequency of doubt that it had been reading in me since November. It said, "The rules are a lie, someone built to control you." It said, "The silence isn't hunting you, the station is." It said, "Open the door and you'll see there's nothing out there that a rational person needs to fear." All in my voice, all in the even, slightly formal tone I use when I've been thinking about something for a long time. And I want to make sure I'm being precise. It knew that tone. It had heard it through weeks of logbook readings and station briefings and late shift conversations. I did not answer. I did not move toward the door. And then my voice said the same words again, from inside the station, from behind the propane stove, from a position roughly 8 feet from where I was sitting. It was inside. I reached across the desk without standing and put my hand on Reyes' shoulder and shook once. She came awake immediately, which was how she slept, not gradually, but all at once, from nothing to present. She looked at me. I pointed at the space behind the stove. She listened. She heard it, my voice, very quiet, constructing a sentence that was almost right, almost the way I would say it. Almost, but not quite. The gap between an original and a copy that has studied the original very carefully, but has never been the original. She put her mouth close to my ear, and she breathed. It's learning your inside voice. The copy migrated from outside to inside as it perfects the voice. That was the logic of Rule 5, the thing that the rule implied without stating. It was inside with us. It could sound like me. It was still slightly wrong, still not quite me, still audibly a copy to someone who knew the original well. But it had been inside the station for an unknown number of minutes before I heard it. And it was getting better. And the rule existed because at some point the copy becomes close enough that proximity and darkness and fear close the gap the rest of the way. Reyes was watching the space behind the stove. I was watching her face. We were both completely still. And then, from the cellar, for the first time in 3 weeks, the hum stuttered. The masking tone did not stop all at once. It degraded, that is the precise word, the way a signal degrades when a component is failing. A flutter in the sub-bass frequency, then a gap, then a partial recovery, then a longer gap. I felt it in my back teeth first. That specific absence of the vibration I had stopped consciously noticing, because it had become the constant background of the station's acoustic environment. When a constant becomes absent, the absence is enormous. Reyes was at the cellar hatch in 4 steps, key in hand, and then she stopped. She looked at me. She set the key down on the desk, because Rule 6 did not say, if the cellar tone stops, go down and fix it. It said, if the cellar tone stops, both of you go silent and still until dawn. No exceptions, no matter who is hurt. She knew what the array needed. She had been maintaining it for 2 winters. She knew which component would fail first and how to replace it, and how long the repair would take. And the rule said, do not. The rule said, whatever the cost of the hum being gone, the cost of making sound in the attempt to restore it is higher. We looked at each other. The hum went out. Completely, finally, totally out. And the decibel meter dropped to 4. I had not known it could go below 9. I had calibrated my understanding of the silence around 9, 8, 7. At 4, the unit was reading values that should have been physically impossible in an outdoor environment. At 4, the acoustic absorption of the valley had become total. At 4, we were fully exposed. Every sound we had been making for weeks, our voices, our breathing, our footsteps, the small sounds of 2 people living in a small space, was now audible to anything that had been waiting for the masking tone to stop. We went still, both of us. We stood in the main room, and we went completely still, and we did not speak, and we did not make any sound that could be avoided. And we waited. The outer door opened. Not broke open, opened. The latch turned from the outside, slowly, and the outer door swung inward with the precision of something that had learned the mechanism. And then the inner door. Same precision. The cold air from outside came in, and it was the cold of a night at 4 decibels of ambient, the cold of a valley that had swallowed every sound for miles in every direction. Something came into the station, and it did not make a sound. And in the darkness, because we had dimmed all lights per protocol when the silence had begun, I could not see it. I could only hear it. and what I heard was breathing. 2 sets of breathing in the back room, when there should have been one. The darkness was not complete. The LED task lamp put out enough light to see by, barely, shapes and distances, but not a detail. I stood at the monitoring desk, and I could see the doorway to the back room, and I could see the dim suggestion of the back room beyond it. 2 shapes, one at the bunk, one near the door, both breathing, both the same height, both the same posture, both standing perfectly still, facing me. One of them whispered my name, and then the other one whispered my name. Same voice. Dana Reyes. Her voice, her exact register, the way she said Marcus when she needed me to pay attention, the precise length of the 2 syllables. Both of them said it at a whisper, and both were correct, and neither was faster or flatter than the other. And I could not tell. Standing in the near dark, with the meter at 4, and the hum gone from the cellar, and whatever had walked in through the unlocked door, standing in the back room, I could not tell which one was real. Rule 3. Say nothing and do not turn around. Except turning around was not the problem. The problem was standing still while both of them waited, and knowing that any sound I made was being heard in a valley at 4 decibels, and that the grief I felt in this moment, the specific terror of not knowing which person in front of me was the person I was responsible for, was the loudest thing I was capable of producing. And that Rule 4 was the rule that was most actively trying to fail me right now. I could not cry. I could not call out. I could not make the sound of a human being who is afraid and alone and responsible for someone they can't protect. The entity was betting that I would. It had found the frequency of my specific wound in the first week. It had practiced the voice of the person I would do anything to protect. And now, it was offering me a choice designed to produce exactly the sound that would bring everything down on us at once. Rule 6. No movement, no sound, until dawn. I stood at the desk. Both Reyeses waited. I thought about Pike's last log entry. I thought about the way he had written it, precisely, carefully, in the specific handwriting of someone who is making sure the record is clear. I thought about what he had understood, that Reyes hadn't let herself explain fully, what she had communicated in the small gaps of the story she told on the roof. That the wrong answer is not always the copy's answer. That sometimes the wrong answer is the one you choose to give. The meter read 4. The darkness held. Both figures waited. I understood what it was going to cost. The shift from 4 to 5 on the decibel meter took 2 hours. From 5 to 8 took another hour. I stood at the desk for the entirety of that time, and I counted the breathing in the room. That is what Rule 7 instructs. At the end of a silence, before you speak normally, count the breathing in the room. If you count more people than are supposed to be there, keep counting until the number is right. Never stop early. 2 people should be in this room, me and Reyes. I counted 3 breaths, not dramatically, not in a pattern that announced itself. Just 3 separate rhythms, shallow, regular, alive, occupying the station's air. 1 from the desk, where I stood. 2 from the back room, where the 2 shapes had been, and where they still were, and where I had not turned to look. The gray light that passes for dawn at this latitude started at the windows around 7:15. The light did not come quickly. It crept, the way sound comes back after a silence, surfacing in small increments, until you realize the quality of the darkness has changed, and then you realize it has been changing for some time. I counted. I kept counting. The two rhythms from the back room were identical. Not similar. Identical. Timed to within fractions of a second of each other. The way two sounds played from the same source sync. Because one of them was the original, and one of them was the copy. And the copy had become precise enough to replicate not just the voice, but the breathing, the rate, the depth. The small, unconscious pause between the exhale and the next inhale that is specific to each person's resting respiratory pattern. I had spent 12 years working with the acoustic properties of human breathing in enclosed spaces. I had placed microphones 12 inches from vocalists' mouths in tracking sessions and worked with the full spectrum of respiratory audio. I knew what breathing sounded like when it was real, and I knew what it sounded like when it was reproduced. I could not tell the difference. That was the horror that built in the station's early light, while the meter climbed toward 12. Not that the copy was there, not even that the copy was perfect, but that my trained ear, the ear I had depended on through 12 years of professional precision, could not find the gap. The third breath synchronized exactly with mine. I stopped. I started again. I counted. 1 breath from the desk. 2 breaths from the back room, synchronized, simultaneous, identical. One of them was Reyes. One of them was not. The meter crossed 12. The threshold chirped, and one of the voices from the back room said my name, very quietly, waiting for the answer that would tell it whether I was going to turn around. This is the part that I have to explain carefully, because it is the part that sounds like something a rational person would not do. And I need you to understand that I am a rational person, and I made a rational decision. Pike wrote, "I answered wrong on purpose, so she wouldn't have to." He did not mean that he gave an incorrect answer by accident. He did not mean he confused the rules. He meant that he understood, at the end, what the cost of the answer was, and he chose to pay it himself rather than let Reyes pay it. The entity copies by hearing a voice enough times. It learns the acoustic fingerprint of a person through proximity and repetition. The buddy check works both directions. When you say a name, you teach the entity your voice. By the time it can pass the check, by the time it can answer with enough accuracy that it can fool the person asking it, has been learning from that person for long enough that it knows their pattern, including their response to hearing the correct answer versus the wrong one. If the real Reyes had been the one who answered, if she had said the correct response, and I had accepted it and turned around, the entity would have remained in the room, hidden in the ambiguity of two identical presences, and the silence, and the night, and the options would have continued to close. But there was a mechanic the entity hadn't accounted for, and it was this. When the entity passes the check perfectly, it reveals itself, because the real person and the copy are both present and both functioning, and both indistinguishable. The only way to separate them is to be the one who makes the check ambiguous. The only way to give the entity a clear target, something to follow out of the station and away from the person it was meant to consume, was to become that target deliberately. I answered wrong. Not randomly wrong. Specifically, carefully wrong, in the way that a person who understood the entity's interest would answer. I gave a response that sounded like a person on the edge of breaking. A response at the frequency that the thing had been fishing for since November. A response that carried the shape of grief and fear and the specific quality of a human sound under emotional pressure. I gave it something louder to follow than Reyes. One set of footsteps left the back room. One set crossed the main room. One set went through the outer door and into the dawn, and the snow received them, and the valley absorbed them the way the valley absorbed everything, and they did not come back. One set of footsteps stayed. I sat at the desk, with my back still to the back room, and I listened to one breath where there had been two, and the meter read 14, and the propane heater started ticking again, and the day arrived. Whether the footsteps that left were the entity following a sound, or me following an entity, I cannot tell you with certainty. I know which one I intended. I know which one I believe. I do not know if they are the same thing. I left Tanaq Bend in the 3rd week of March, when the days had grown long enough that travel was viable and the federal seasonal rotation officially concluded. The bush plane came in on a Tuesday, the same packed snow strip, Walt at the controls, the same compressed efficiency of a pilot who did not stay longer than necessary. Reyes was there for the departure. She stood at the station door while I loaded the duffel and the hard case onto Walt's cargo sled, and she didn't say much, and neither did I, and that felt correct. The incident report for the Tanaq Bend winter rotation listed one surviving caretaker. The name field is smudged. I have seen the report. A photocopy of it was forwarded to me by the district coordinator with a note that said, records from the final week were administratively incomplete due to equipment malfunction. The name is there, written in ink, but the photocopy renders it in a gray blur at the critical syllable, and I have not requested the original. I have not requested it because I am not sure what name I would want the original to have. The man who drove the snow machine out on a Tuesday in March and loaded gear onto a bush plane and flew south and drove a rental car to a city and checked into a hotel room and slept for 11 hours, that man had all of Marcus Holloway's memories. His guilt about Callum, his 12 years in studio work, his specific knowledge of acoustic physics and decibel meters and voice print frequencies, his knowledge of Reyes, of the rules, of the red logbook, of Pike's last entry. He had everything. The question I can't stop sitting with is, so would the copy. The doubling that started at Tanaq Bend did not stay in the valley. It came with me in small ways that I tell myself are nothing. The coffee that is sometimes already made when I come into the kitchen in the morning. The window that is sometimes open when I know I closed it. The dreams in which I am in the station, and I am both people at the desk, both the one sitting and the one standing behind. And I can't determine which perspective is mine, because both feel equally familiar. I try not to test it. I try not to run the kind of experiment that a recording engineer would design to determine whether a signal is original or reproduced, because I am not sure I am ready for that answer. And I am specifically not sure what I would do with it. The valley of Tanaq Bend is 3,000 miles behind me. The decibel meter on my phone is 11 inches from my right hand. Some nights, it still drops below 12. On quiet nights, not silent, just quiet. The ordinary urban quiet of an apartment building at 2 a.m. when the street traffic is thinned and the neighbors have stopped moving. My decibel app reads numbers that have no business being that low. And I sit very still, and I do not make any sound that I can avoid. I have the recordings. I've told you that. There are 17 of them now, filed on my phone under a folder I labeled Station Log because I needed to call it something, and because the truth of what they are is still something I approach sideways. I recorded them during the last week at Tanaq Bend, on nights when the silence had passed, and I wanted documentation of something that I knew the logbook alone couldn't hold. I have played 3 of them twice. The second listening is not the same recording as the first. I have described this already at the beginning, but I want to be precise about it now that you have the context to understand what it means. The changes are small. A pause where there was no pause. A breath in a register I don't recognize. My own name, once, at the end of a recording where I never said my own name, in my own voice, but slightly lower than the register I use when I'm alone. Slightly lower. Slightly different. Almost right. I keep the recordings because I need someone to have my real voice on file. I need a record of the original, so that if the gap closes, if the copy perfects the distance between almost right and exactly right, there is evidence of what I sounded like before. That is the rational reason. The other reason is lonelier. The other reason is that I am a man who once heard a sound and decided it was something other than what it was. And I will not make that mistake again. And the recordings are my commitment to that. They are my version of the logbook. They are my version of keeping count. I recorded this, everything I've told you. I recorded it on a Tuesday night in an apartment in a city where the nearest person is approximately 14 feet away through a wall. And the decibel app on my phone read 11 when I started and reads 9 now. And I am sitting very still. The reason I am telling you, the reason I finally told anyone, is this. I need someone to run the check for me. I cannot count the breathing in a room by myself, because one of the breaths I would be counting is mine. And if the count is wrong, I cannot be certain which breath is the one that shouldn't be there. So I recorded it. I put my real voice here, in sequence, in order, with every detail I could fit into it. I put Pike's words here. I put Reyes' name here. I put the rules here, all 7 of them, in the order they were given to me, in the season they were earned. And now, I need you to do something for me. Listen to where you are right now. Be still for a moment. Put down whatever you are holding and be still. Count the breathing in the room. Take your time. Don't stop early. The rule is very specific about that. Keep counting until the number is right. If the number is right, if it is exactly what it should be, no more, no less, then you are fine. Then this ends here, and the valley is 3,000 miles from you. And the thing that hunts by sound is still in interior Alaska, learning voices in the dark. But if the count is off, if there is one more breath than there should be, slow and quiet and very nearly your own rhythm, then I want you to know something. I want you to know that I'm sorry. It followed a sound to find you. And the sound it followed was this. Don't answer it. Whatever you do, in whatever quiet room you're sitting in right now, at whatever hour the dark has decided to go, this still, don't answer it. And if it says your name, if it says it in a voice that is almost yours, but not quite, not yet, count again. Don't stop early. Don't stop early.